ZERI Jungle is really good. I love playing her. It's so fun. And so comments like that, right? That's kind of the reason like not locking roles is potentially a really good thing. Now, of course, we want to assume that you're trying to win the game. But if you are trying to win the game, there is very reasonable, not reasonable, real, in my opinion, marginal value to having characters that can just show up in different roles sometimes and be played there. It provides some marginal value to like, hey, this guy who in chat likes ZERI Jungle, so that's something that like he normally wouldn't get to experience unless we allowed it, right? So that improves his experience. And then also it's going to create situations where it's like, okay, again, assuming he's trying to win, this game has a ZERI Jungle in it. That's a way different experience than like if you have the standard Lee Sin every game. And everybody in the game is then going to have a different game because of that. And that type of variety is very good in the long run for competitive multiplayer games that, you know, you're going to be playing for hundreds of hours. What about KAYLE's current state? KAYLE's probably suffering right now after all the attack speed nerfs, but there's not really any point in doing anything until the new items come out, because she'll probably be affected by them in some way. Also, why does level 16 empower only utility and not damage? Level 16 empowers damage. It gives you, I believe, 50 attack range and permanent passive, and the ultimate gets bigger radius. If you think that KAYLE's level 16 doesn't empower damage, then I'm very confused as to how you play that character, because all those changes are pretty meaningful increases in damage, in your ability to deal damage. Like quite literally, you are shortcutting. You're getting permanent passive movement speed. You are shortcutting your need to stack up your passive for the waves, and you are hitting people in a bigger AoE with an AoE burst of damage, and you are hitting from longer range and attacking more. It's a pretty strong upgrade, I would argue. It's not true damage, though. Do you think it's fair that Yasuo and Yone have no mana? I understand the identity of spamming abilities. Part of the reason to me that the sustain meta feels so strong on Yone is that he has no mana and plays into his sustain. Well, if Yone has a sustain problem, we should nerf his sustain, right? We can nerf his shield, we can nerf his health regen, there's things we could do there. Yasuo and Yone's patterns are built around using their spells repeatedly. Their patterns stop making sense when they have mana, unfortunately. And we believe that with characters like Yasuo and Yone, if you don't have mana, we could do other ways to nerf them. Would it be possible to add a damage counter to Red Smite? Would this be possible? So there's an ask a lot of times for like, hey, can I see how much damage my thing has done? And totally understand where the ask comes from. The hard part though is a lot of times damage counters on an item aren't really worthwhile, in the sense that it doesn't change your gameplay and doesn't really make you think about the item different. And also damage counters tend to have like a lot of upkeep and things like that, but it also like, you know, can like, what's the word I'm using? Like mess up their tooltips and make their tooltips bloated out. And so it's kind of just this question of you're weighing the idea that you want to know what this thing did with the question of, here's all this upkeep that it has, here's all this tooltip bloat that it has, it's not just free to put it in, and at the end of the day, is it actually providing you with valuable information that will make you think about your item differently or think about your gameplay differently? So in a lot of cases, like one of the hard parts with this is that you're not actually going to have a different experience by having those tooltips in the game, even if it is nice to look at them. Doesn't mean it isn't right to do these things in some places, but just noting that a lot of times these trackers don't necessarily add a lot of value to the gameplay experience. Well, they can potentially add costs. So those are some things to think about when asking about like more information. There's another thing that you have to think about as a game dev for really just any game, is the idea of information overload. There'll be a lot of players who will often ask like, hey, can you show me information about this thing? Can you show me information about that thing? And oftentimes showing information is very good. Like it feels good as a player to like know what your things do, and sometimes that's actually very, very important. But the problem is that if you keep adding information, and eventually all the information you're giving in different places is going to wash things out and make it so that any given piece of information is less useful because it's just harder to read, harder to see, harder to understand. And so with any given game, it is a real choice you need to make as a dev for what information you are displaying to players versus what information can go on the back burner and be like harder to look up or maybe even not possible to look up. And the answer is not always give all information. And that's just something you always have to be thinking about and considering. There's a idea here I was gonna like keep going to. Okay. And to like kind of like illustrate to you like how information can be overwhelming, I'll actually just use a game like League of Legends in terms of gameplay. So think about a game like League or, I don't know, Team Fortress 2 or Overwatch. There's a lot of games like this that has a spell that is very easy to dodge, right? So in League, that's going to be Ezreal ult. And Ezreal ult, if you just are standing there and Ezreal just shoots his ult at you and you're looking at him, he's probably not going to hit you because you're going to see that ult and you're going to see him casting it and you're going to be like, Lamau, nice try, bro, and you're going to just walk out of where he's aiming. Easy to dodge. But one of the reasons that's true is because you have a ton of information in that situation that isn't competing with anything else. Now, consider Ezreal ult in a 5-person team fight where you have 5 other people also throwing stuff at you. Or consider that hard to dodge, easy to dodge spell in Overwatch in a grouped up team fight where you're also trying to dodge McCree ult and Diva ult and all this other stuff, right? Actually, Diva ult is a great example of a spell like this. Suddenly, what became very, very easy to dodge, with all the extra information and things you have to consider being thrown at you, suddenly becomes even harder to dodge. And that's kind of just an idea of like how information overload, by putting too much information on people's screens, makes any individual thing harder to react to, harder to interact with, harder to understand, harder to grok in your head and comprehend. And this could also apply to just information you're displaying on the UI and stuff, where it's like, at some point, having 5,000 different tooltips just makes your brain turn off when you look at the tooltips and you stop absorbing what they even mean. So stuff to think about as a game dev is where you're putting the information and what's important versus what's less important. Does all the hate that Riot gets bother you? Have you ever felt like pulling back the community because of it? Oh, of course, naturally. I get death threats every day. There's a reason a lot of devs do not talk to you all. But I don't know. I like talking about the game. And also, I just don't have much to do with my life. I think I would stream a lot less if I had a lot more to do. But I don't have a lot to do, and I like talking about the game, and I like talking to all of you. And also, I just like talking about game design in general. I think that's fun. There's definitely a lot of inspiring devs out there who talk to people about games, and I don't know, gives me something to shoot for, I suppose. But yeah, it can be exhausting at times. It can be scary at times. There's a lot of nasty folks out there. So, always got to think about that. With all the Season 11 crit changes basically being gone, why is crit still 175%? Well, the question is crit balanced at 200, right? Yes, we changed a lot of these things, but the characters are also seem to be doing pretty powerful things regardless. So I don't know if it's a good idea to be like, and also 25% increased crit damage. Like, the reason crit damage was lowered was because all the season changes were buffing 80 carries, and so we needed to find ways to nerf them. And it seems like 80 carries are still quite powerful, so there's not really a impetus to be like, hey, they need more crit damage after all that.